lifetime that we have, embracing what we've been giving, wanting to live the moments that we have. We're orbiting the conversation around relationships, naming how life happens in relationships, right? And so we're exploring then Jesus' pattern of relationships, looking at his life as a good example for this, how he had three great loves, three primary relationships, his way that he held relationships in balance. And so his example, this pattern, it's something that shows us what our relationships can look like as well, in a way, of course, unique to us, and yet it's a great thing for us to look to. Because of the core of who we are, we also long for these loves, for this kind of belonging, this pattern of connection that we see in the life of Jesus. So this pattern of relationships, we break it down into the points of an equilateral triangle, just as a little way to remember that. So picturing it as showing how Jesus, then, how we too can spend time up, time with God, how we can spend time in, our time with our friends and our family, and then time out, time beyond ourselves, outside of our comfort zone in the great needs of our world. So up, in, and out. So these are these three great loves, these three primary relationships we've already been talking about the last few weeks. And this becomes a tool then for us to use just in our lives, checking in with ourselves, with each other around our three great loves, noticing when we're out of balance, then looking for those kairos moments, right? Looking for those moments that get our attention. As we mentioned earlier, those moments where God is right there with us. The kingdom of God is within arm's reach. It's right here. So letting either the imbalance that we're experiencing in our relationships or the kairos moments that come up invite us into change and into growth. So that's what we're digging into this fall. Can you dig it? Yep, all right. So that's where we're at. That's remember, this is where we are. Or if you're here for the first time, here's where we are. Which means each week. So that means as we go through this, we're holding the question of just how balanced do you feel in these relationships, in these areas? And it really is a question like, how about you? Like, how are you this week? How are you today? So we hold this question, this awareness actively as we spend time working our way around the triangle this fall, up and out, talking about these different important dynamic relationships that we have through the fall. So last week, who heard last week? Ryan shared his story of Up, really. Ryan Phillips was here on the microphone sharing his own journey of growing up, as he said, in a church that he said a diamond in the buckle of the Bible Belt, right? So that was a context that he grew up in. He shared his own shifting perspective over the years that pulled him from kind of the bounds of conservative Christianity to a very inclusive, holistic way of seeing his body, seeing our bodies, seeing our whole selves as a whole. And part of that then has drawn him into this degree in medicine and naturopathic medicine. So for us to tend to mind, body, and spirit is to tend to the whole thing. It's all connected, which is so often a message that is lost in Christianity, that our bodies matter in all the ways that we name the body as sinful and a stumbling block, or even when we talk about it being a temple, how that can be, that's hard. That's hard language to work through. So did you hear Ryan? If not, go, listen, enjoy. Okay, so good. So I want to name that something that Ryan's story revealed for us is the importance of asking ourselves a question. And it's a question that Jesus asks of his disciples as well. And he first asked, who do people say that I am? Like, what are they saying? And then he asks his disciples, but who do you say that I am? My friends, to talk about this relationship that we have, as we're calling it Up, that we have this connection with God, the ground of all being, the creator, father, mother, however you would name God. We have this relationship. And so as we talk about this, it's important to name that who we see God to be defines what this relationship can look like, right? Like whoever we think we define God as, that's going to shape this dynamic relationship that we have. Have you ever thought about that before? Thought about how who God is for you matters? What I love about Ryan's story is that his answer to who Jesus is, who God is, we could see it evolve for him, right? We got to see this inclusive, involved, embodied God that he is now getting to know. And from what I heard from those who were here in the room, many were moved to tears through that conversation that he led, just thinking of their own experience in conservative Christianity or in other places, or thinking of that of friends who they have who are in that perspective still. And they had tears because they longed for their friends or for themselves to know this God that Ryan now knows. They longed for that same kind of knowing, a God who longs for our health, a God who isn't making a list and checking it twice, our God who loves us as we are. So who do you say God is now at this time in your life? How is your understanding, your knowing of God evolving? Like Ryan's, differently than Ryan's? Is it a journey of deconstruction and reconstruction? How is that going for you? Who is God now? So I want you to hold that. One of the places that we turn to get to know God and let our awareness of God evolve and grow is by spending time in the Bible. And for me to say that, you might go, wait a minute, like, hang on. Every time I hear someone quote the Bible, it doesn't sound very evolutionary, right? There's like no evolving God there. People talk about it like a static, this is the answer kind of thing, but it all depends on how we read the Bible, right? And at Salt House, we're a place that sees the Bible as what it is. It's a collection of ancient writings pulled into one collection of books that tells part of the story of God. Each book was written at a different time by different people, addressing different contexts and situations. And we find poetry and songs and letters and genealogies and stories that have layers and layers of meaning to them. So we get to know God by spending time in the Bible, and we see the Bible in this way. And in this way means then that the more time that we spend, the more that we learn and listen and ask questions and dig in, the fuller and deeper and sometimes confusing and angering, but illuminating and inspiring. And, I think it becomes all of those things for us, and a more inclusive too vision of God we then get as we get to know God through the Bible. Does that make sense? Like that's how we can engage with it. And again, the Bible is the story of God. And it's good to know God there, but we also know we get to know God all around us. Like God is in all the things too, not just the Bible. But today, we are making it about the Bible. So in our journey together in this relationship conversation and having heard Ryan's story of kind of evolving consciousness of himself and of God, we get to spend time today in the Bible, spending time with God, getting to know God, tending to this relationship with the ground of all being, this relationship up. We get to practice that together today. So we're going to do it today reading the Bible using Lectio Divina, which is a practice that we come back to here every 6 or 8 weeks or so. Lectio Divina is Latin for divine reading or holy word. It is a practice that's been used by Jesus followers since the 3rd century, so it's been around for a while. And why we use it now is because it lets the Bible remain, again, as something that it was intended to be, a living, breathing collection of writings that sings that song of the holy, that gives us a few little snippets of that song of God and of all creation. And it doesn't make the Bible into something that has one clear thing to say for each little bit that we read, but lets it stand in mystery and possibility and with endless layers of meaning and winks and insights and inside jokes for us to kind of pay attention to. Not only written long ago for them then, but also written for us now. So holding it kind of across time in that way too. So Lectio Divina, for those who are new to it, it's a very simple and accessible way of reading the Bible. It involves rereading, repeating a section of the Bible, listening for a word that gets our attention in that passage, and then prayerfully just holding that word, being curious about it, looking for connections into our life right now, and then just asking what God is saying to us in that. And I will say that Lectio Divina is not everybody's jam, and that's okay. Thank you in advance for kind of hanging in with us as we go through this. If you're like, this is not my thing, thank you for just being with us as we do it together. So today we're going to turn to a text in John chapter 15. So one of the 4 biographies of Jesus, one of the Gospels. So this is right after Jesus says, "I am the vine and you are the branches." So if you remember that part, that's where we're at. So Jesus goes on to fill out this picture of what it looks like to be connected to, in relationship with him, this image of vine and the branches, in all the ways that he, and therefore them then and us now, like how we are all then also connected to God. It may be obvious that I chose this text because it's a place where Jesus provides some imagery and language about who we say that Jesus is, who we say that God is, and our own, again, evolving understanding of who God is. So as we listen, we can continue to hold that awareness, that question of who is God for me right now? Like, how would I respond to that? So we hold that actively in this too. So this is John 15, 9 through 17. We're using the inclusive Bible for those listening and watching elsewhere. So it's John 15, 9 through 17. So let's do this. Let's practice listening. Let's spend time with God together now. So I want you to just get comfortable in your seat as you're able to. Connect with your breath. Roll those shoulders back. I always find it good to wiggle my toes and like feel my feet in my shoes to actually be grounded here. And so the first step of Lectio is simply reading the text. We just read it. I invite you to stay connected to your breath and attentive. You can close your eyes if you would like to, because our first time reading through is just to hear it with no agenda, just hearing the text for what it is. So just let the words fall on your ears. Again, eyes closed if you would like to. So John 15, 9 through 17. So this is Jesus speaking to his disciples. He's continuing, and this is in the middle of a conversation, but this is what he says. As my Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Live on in my love. And you will live on in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I live on in Abba God's love and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this that my joy may be yours and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as subordinates, because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have learned from Abba God. It was not you who chose me, it was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that whatever you ask of Abba God in my name, God will give you. This command I give you, that you love one another. So as we begin to listen more deeply, we're going to read it through again. And this time through, we listen for a word or phrase that gets our attention, that touches our heart, that's really just all that we're listening for, one word or phrase. And this is John's gospel, so it's a bit poetic, so sometimes it feels a little circular, and so just let yourself get lost in that circularness of it. And if you are a more visual person, it's printed on the bulletin insert that we gave you, the little half sheet, so if you want to visually see it, the text, you can follow along. Otherwise, you can keep your eyes closed. And sometimes we're drawn to more than one word or phrase. You can just pick one. There's no right or wrong answer. So just kind of grab something, and that's okay. And just something that you feel curious about or confused by or stirred by. And when that word or phrase is found, just gently recite it to yourself. Hold it, repeat it, and reflect on it during the short silence that will follow this time reading it through. Jesus continued. As my Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Live on in my love. And you will live on in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I live on in Abba God's love and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this that my joy may be yours and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as subordinates, because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have learned from Abba God. It was not you who chose me. It was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that whatever you ask of Abba God in my name, God will give you. This command I give you, that you love one another. If you're willing, and if a word or phrase is coming out for you, I invite you just to speak that out loud, just that word or phrase with no commentary or anything yet. Just let us kind of hear what's coming up for you.
Love one another.
Love one another.
Your joy may be complete.
Your joy may be complete. As I have loved you.
Live on in my love.
Live on in my love. It was I who chose you. I call you friends. Thank you for sharing. The second step in Lectio Divina is to reflection. So we each hold the word or phrase and ask where the word or phrase touches our life today. If we are still deciding on a word or phrase, that's okay too. But we again, just to hold that. And as we do this, don't be afraid of distractions or kind of busy brain that happens as we're in this space. Memories or thoughts, it's part of who we are, and they rise up during Lectio Divina often because it's coming up because of what we're going through. So we just hold it, asking it to be given to God along with the rest of ourselves. So embrace those things that come up, listen to them, don't fight them. And really the question that we are holding is one that we often ask here at Salt House, the God, what are you saying to me? So that's kind of what we're holding as we just kind of repeat this word, this phrase. So just repeat that, holding it in dialogue with God, listening kind of for the why, like, God, what are you saying to me this, as this has grabbed our attention. So we'll have Matt come up to read this time. So you can just hear it in a different voice. And again, we'll have a little bit of silence after. So again, John 15, 9 through 17.
As my Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Live on in my love, and you will live on in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I live on in Abba, God's love, and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this, that my joy may be yours, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as subordinates, because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have learned from Abba God. It was not you who chose me. It was I who chose you, to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that whatever you ask Abba God in my name, God will give you. This command I give you, that you love one another.
We're hearing in a moment after our final reading. But the third step of Lectio Divina is responding, to respond. So the third and final reading is for the purpose of hearing an invitation into a response. What is God in this text calling us to do or to become today or this week? It's the second question, really. The first question. Hi, Matthew. The first question is the God, what are you saying? And the second one is the what are we going to do about it question. So we really hold them together. What response might come from what we hear? So the response question, it's important to note that answering this question may take longer than just a few minutes, obviously, so it becomes something we can live into in the week to come, living into that response, but we listen for our response as we hear the passage this final time. As my Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Live on in my love. And you will live on in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I live on in Abba God's love and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this, that my joy may be yours and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer speak of you as subordinates because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends because I have made known to you everything I have learned from Abba God. It was not you who chose me, it was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure so that whatever you ask of Abba God in my name, God will give you. This command I give you, that you love one another. Now we make space to share what we're hearing. Today, the way we'll do that is to break into groups of 2 or no more than 3 at the most, just to take 1 minute each, just a quick moment, just to name the word that you're hearing, that word or phrase, and then why you think it's coming up for you, what's interesting or curious or disruptive about it in some way, and really just to take that quick minute. And do know that you don't have to say anything. You can just, I'm good, I'm going to pass, and that's totally appropriate. Or you can just say, this is the word or phrase that came up, and I don't know why it came up for me, but that's what I'm hearing today, and that's enough too, because I know this can be it can be vulnerable to open up like that. So connecting with folks that you don't know, or at least did not arrive here with, is always a good choice, because on the car ride home or the walk home, you can always you can say, hey, what came up for you? So that can happen later. So it's nice to choose someone that you didn't arrive here with, just to connect in that way. So let's move smoothly and decisively. Find someone, no more than 3 altogether, and you can get up and move around as you need to make that happen, okay? So just a quick minute to share. Let's take a moment to do that. All right, friends. Thank you. All right, friends. Let's wrap up. Oh, no.
Yeah.
All right, friends. I invite you to continue the conversations after worship too. Thank you for that courageous work of sharing, for sharing your experience, to share what God is saying. For me, my phrase, I spent time in this text all week, and my phrase that I kept coming back to was live on in my love. And as I sat with it, at first I just pictured like this big blob of love that surrounds me always, kind of like a hamster ball, like those big things, like you're just like running around in the thing all the time, like this big love bubble. I know, welcome to my brain and my imagination. But then sitting with it more, I held this kind of love bubble idea against how it's just been a crazy time for me right now in my life, like with school starting with the kids and launching all things Salt House this fall. And it's just a really busy time. And for me, when I'm in that kind of space, it's hard to feel like I'm living in that place of being loved, of knowing that I am beloved, of living on in God's love, as Jesus says here. And so this all felt very connected to a Kairos moment that I had this week for me that played out on Tuesday morning. I was awake at 4 a.m. on Tuesday morning and then didn't fall back asleep. Anyone else? Heather's laughing. Anyone else with me in the good morning? Yeah. I'll text you next time. At least we can hang out together. And I didn't fall back asleep. And so after lying there for a few hours, I was awake and it finally was like, God, talking to God, and I'm like, okay, so we're doing this thing at Salt House, God, and we're doing this fall, and we're talking about how you're in all the things, and we can pay attention, and so it'd be kind of nice to get a little sign of something for me too. What about my needs in all of this? Again, welcome to my brain. What about me, God? And so later, I'm getting the kids ready for school. We're getting out the door. We get in the van, and the radio station was already on. It was set to Spirit 105.3. So that was on. And June, our daughter, goes, oh, I love this song. Daddy showed me the video of this song yesterday, and it's called Wherever I Go. And I was like, well, that's cool. I don't really know the song. And after it's over, it cuts to one of those behind the music moments, right? So the songwriter, Dan Bremnes, he's describing what the song is about and why he wrote it. And he says, this song is based on Joshua 1:9. And so I grew up in the Lutheran Church, many of you know that, but I went through confirmation, which is this experience in mainline churches for young adults to confirm their baptism, essentially to own their faith as their own. And at that point, you got to pick a verse from the Bible that was your confirmation verse, something that spoke to you at that moment, that captured your faith and God and all that stuff at this milestone moment. And can you guess what my confirmation verse was, right? Joshua 1:9. And so this ride to preschool just got super interesting for me to hear this. So in this moment, because I'd kind of forgotten a few hours earlier. So I then remembered my sleepless night prayer saying, God, show me a sign, where are you? And all this. And the songwriter goes, Joshua 1:9, where it says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So the song is about knowing that God is always with us and we shouldn't be discouraged no matter how we're feeling. Now, I'm just trying to keep it on the road at this point, on the way to preschool. And so I'm teary-eyed and I'm thinking, I'm fine, God, I get it. You're here, I got it. Show off. Darn it. So it really was wonderful. And for me, and here's the thing about this relationship with God, this interaction with God, with the sacred, with the universe. So God was totally speaking my language in that moment, right? I heard God there in that moment within arm's reach. And if it happened to you in the same way, you might not have heard that as God, or you might not think that God is like that or somehow controlling the airwaves of the radio every moment. That might not have been your experience, and it doesn't have to be. But that moment works for me. That spoke to me as God in that moment. And God is going to speak. God gets your attention, meets you in a language and in gestures and words and sunsets and whatever speaks to you. Whether that's through Game of Thrones episodes or the latest podcast you're listening to or the book you're reading or the comment from a friend or a tweet that you read, right? So as we have this conversation about God and spending time and hearing God, it's really important to name that, right? That God, it won't be your confirmation verse, but you know what I mean? It will be for you. And for me, spending more time then in this phrase, live on in my love, I'm realizing it isn't just about living in the love bubble. And it isn't only that God is with me wherever I go, which was what that song was about, but that the love bubble is around the whole thing, is around me, it's around you, it's around all of the created world. God says, do not be discouraged. And in this week that we've been living in, friends, don't we need to hear that again? Do not be discouraged. I am with you wherever you go, because I am everywhere. So my understanding of God in ninth grade, as I chose that verse, my understanding of who God is has evolved so much since then, and yet the same verse still speaks to me about who God is. And to me, that's some of the amazing stuff that's there in the Bible for us, right? Who do you say God is now? So again, thank you for listening, just for doing this work together, listening to the Bible. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing what's coming up for you. And I've had a couple days with this text, right? So I would invite you to continue to hold whatever came up for you. Just hold that in the week to come and pay attention to what's on the radio too, because I think there's something in that. So as we finish our time together, the fourth and final step of Lectio Divina is just to remain, to simply rest, to believe that God has chosen us first, right? As Jesus said, to remain as the beloved in the presence of God, to just be in that space, to hold that all that we've heard spoken through the Bible, but also spoken from each other as a word of grace and hope for us. For God is most certainly speaking to us through each other and through the Bible. So as we remain and finish this holy time, I just invite us to hold this kind of sacred space for and with each other. The band's going to come back up. And as we do this, you're invited to sing this next song, or just to be quiet, to write, to pray, or as my seminary professor said, to remain means to just sit here fat and sassy in the grace of God. So let's do that. Let's remain together and let's pray.